Hey everyone, welcome to the 360th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham.
And your co-host, Kevin Toffel.
And we have an awesome show for you today. We're going to be talking about new rules from Europe about IoT data. We're also going to be talking about robots and what to do with their data. We also have a security report from the ARM PSA certified group worth listening to, and funding for a cybersecurity company and for a wireless company. There's data coming out on people who are buying Amazon Echo devices, and is this a market correction for them? I don't know. Peloton's CEO is changing the way we might think about subscriptions going forward. We've also got tiny news on a smart rower, a new Eve product, and Kevin has reviewed the Eve roller blinds, and he's going to share his thoughts on some smart connected blinds. Our guest this week is Joe Britt, the CEO of Affero, and we're also going to hear from our sponsor, connected motorized shade company, Somfy. But first, before we get into all this, let's hear from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Panticore. Managing the growth of IoT applications and services is still a stretch for many whose development processes have changed little over the years. IoT devices need to be secure, they have to be up to date, and they continuously need to offer innovative functionality. Panticore lets developers implement lightweight containers on embedded Linux. Create your product with any Linux distro and then use a modern container technology to secure and rapidly deploy updates across all of your IoT fleets. You can learn more in Panticore's white paper, found at panticore.com/Stacy on IoT. All right, Kevin, let's kick this show off with big news on the data regulation front. The EU has proposed this week what they're calling the Data Act. And this is a big deal. The EU is basically looking at all of the data created by connected devices and realizing it can be a very big competitive barrier to entry for smaller firms, and also can lock people in, lock consumers and buyers of products in. And so what they're trying to do is create the Data Act. And they want that to remove barriers for people accessing data, but still make it possible for companies to deploy IoT sensors in places and get that data. So what do they want to do? The Data Act wants to make sure that it reinforces data portability. So any data collected by devices comes back to the consumer. So you can access any data collected by your devices, and you can download it, you can share it across different platforms. This is both for consumers and for corporations.
This actually makes sense because a lot of these devices have a ton of useful data, but you can only manage it or get insights from the original vendor, whereas a third party might have better algorithms or new algorithms that give you better actionable insights.
Yes. And another thing that they're trying to do here is make it easier to move your data from applications from another provider to another. So like all my photos are in Apple iCloud. It should be easy for me to move that into Google Photos. This is for consumers. On the business side, it might be all my CRM data is in Salesforce and I want to move it to, I have no idea who the other CRM providers are, to someone else. They also want to make sure that the data sharing agreements between companies are equal. And a good example of this would be like, if I am the maker of a small device, like maybe I'm making a, connected dryer sensor, and I want it to work with Madam A, so Amazon's Echo devices and Amazon's digital assistant. Amazon actually asks for all of the data coming from that device. And if I don't want to give it to them, then I'm not going to be able to let it work with Madam A. And those kind of agreements are pretty unfair for smaller companies. And the EU is like, yeah, we don't want that. We need to make that equal for people.
Yeah, it's too much of a barrier to entry for a small company, a small device maker, because they don't have any real leverage there. They can either not build the product with its connectivity to that ecosystem, or they can just say, all right, you get all the data too. And it's a fundamental shift because all these platforms are built to really not just provide services, but also for the companies themselves to get the data from their own ecosystem.
Yes. And a big part of this is to protect those small and medium-sized businesses from having to share data they're not wanting to share or force them to use things they don't want to use. This might even deal with things like right to repair. So the EU actually uses a farmer as one of their examples in their rationale for doing this. And they're basically like, hey, the farmer wants to optimize his equipment. He wants to entrust this farm organization software from one vendor to do this. Then if a startup develops an algorithm and wants to train on the database.
I wonder what company they were thinking of when they designed that part of the Data Act.
Their example is they're saying a farmer wants to optimize the use of different equipment as well as seeds and fertilizer on his farm, and he wants to entrust this to farm optimization software from a specialized vendor. The Data Act gives him rights from all of the data, like from the equipment itself, all the way down to like his sensors on the farm and how the plants are reacting to that fertilizer. The EU has created what they call the Data Governance Act, and they did that back in 2020. And the Data Act is going to be the second big legislative initiative as part of their whole strategy for data. And I think this is really forward-looking, and this is going to be their last horizontal, so all the way across building block in their data strategy. And they want this to happen around 2023, which is next year. So they've got to get buy-in from other legislators on the EU, but I like it. I'm very excited to see where this goes. It's going to have a big impact for IoT.
Yeah, it's definitely a good approach. I like the whole your data is your data. You know, I know they're not saying that, but that's essentially what the gist of this is. But there's a whole industry that's really not being addressed when it comes to this kind of data, neither in the EU nor in the US. And it's probably because people think it's too far out. And that's personal data captured by robots. And I know people are saying, well, I don't see robots every day, and why should we worry about that now? And I would disagree. You may be around robots in public areas and not even be aware of it, or, you know, just not even think about it. I read a very interesting article from an author at Brookings, and she had been to Incheon Airport in Seoul, Korea back in 2019 and saw that they had robots that were helping people find their gates, the departure times, etc. You could scan a QR code on your phone to get, you know, and the robot would look up information for you. And it was an interesting experience because it's a very social thing. And robots are, I think, may make you drop your guard a little bit, in which case you might give up more data without realizing it, like you might to a person. We're going to see a lot more of this probably within the next 5 years. I mean, Stacey, you're on a trip. You just mentioned you bought coffee from a robot barista, for example.
Yes. And now I don't know if the barista has kept my coffee order preferences, tied it to my facial architecture. I don't know. So yeah, the issue here is robots are basically sensors. They have tons of sensors. They're also actuators, but they're basically sensors, and we don't understand how the data what data they're collecting, where it goes to, and how it's going to be used. And the idea here is, as you get more of them in public places, they could be scanning all the time, even if it doesn't feel like it's relevant to the service they're trying to provide. And you might actually think all the way back to, remember Google Maps. So the Google Street View cars driving around, they were not just collecting, image data, they were collecting Wi-Fi data. They got in a lot of trouble for that because nobody knew that was happening. Robots have that same kind of capability, But that's
the other thing. We don't really know the capabilities. If you see a robot roaming around, like there's one in our local supermarket, they've been using them, Marty the robot, for, 4 years now. And I know it's meant to detect and clean up spills and things like that. But I don't know what other sensors are in there. And if those sensors can be used to, get a picture of me when I'm checking out the produce or anything. And if it is, where does that picture go to? And that's kind of part of the problem. Like, people come into my house, they may see a smart speaker or a webcam, and they know what it's capable of doing. You don't know when you see this robot, whether it's humanoid or not, what it's capable of doing. Does it have infrared scanners? Is it recording everything? You just don't know. And because you're in a public place, where do you go to find out the information? Who would you talk to say, well, what sensors does this have? What data does it collect? Where does that data go? What do you do with the data? It's really hard to find that out. So rather than wait a couple of years out when this becomes more commonplace, we should be building off of the frameworks that we are putting in place today, such as the Data Act that you just talked about and others we've talked about in the past, and not wait for devices to be out there and then we react to them and determine how and what they can do with our private data.
Yeah, at a minimum, I feel like they should have an accessible QR code maybe that you could scan and be like, oh, this is made by so-and-so and it's doing this. That would be like, it could link to a site that gave you that information. Yeah. We'll look forward, hopefully, to someone thinking about that. Let's move on to security. All right. This week also was the release of the PSA Certified 2022 Security Report. PSA Certified is an organization that enforces ARM's PSA security. And this is, I can't remember, was it like 2018 that ARM introduced this? But it's basically a way to enforce security at the chip level. And there's different levels of it. And it's pretty cool. Like, I'm a very big fan of PSA certification, levels 2 or 3. And this particular survey tries to check how people feel about IoT security. So they surveyed a little more than 1,000 technology decision makers across Europe, the USA, and APAC. And 90% of respondents have increased the importance placed on security in the last 12 months. And almost 9 in 10 think security is in their top 3 business priorities. So that's good. Like, people care about security now. Yay. And part of that is because we've seen so many more publicized ransomware attacks, hacks, that sort of thing. So that makes sense.
That's for companies, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the consumer data is rather interesting to me as well.
Of course it is. Tell me more.
Oh, okay. I'll talk about consumer IoT. The survey results indicate that consumers are not primarily driven by product features and price. 83% of the respondents say they look for specific security credentials when buying connected products. Now, if I grabbed 100 of my friends, and I really only have like 3 or 4 friends, so this is impossible, I don't think 83 of the 100 would say that. I'm really shocked by that.
Yeah, me too. Because you know what? I get all these people. I feel like people send me links for like, I saw this on Amazon. Do you know anything about the security? But the reason they chose that one is because it was cheaper. Mm-hmm. So, I found this $5 smart plug. Do you think it's secure?
Yeah, people tend to want to know, what does it work with? And then I think it's price. I don't think, unless it's a brand name that they're really not familiar with. I mean, we've had people ask about certain brands that are made in Asia and, what are the security practices and so on. I get that question, yes, but mostly it's not questions about the security.
Yeah. And so I'm like, the survey also says that 96%, so that's pretty much everybody, wants to see an industry-led set of guidelines on IoT best practices. But to that, I say, we actually have that. We have the list of IoT best practices. It's not a secret. So the first thing to know is it's not one size fits all because the risk models associated with different devices are different, right? You're going to want to really lock down your medical devices. You probably don't care so much about like your connected egg product, right? Now, there are holes, like those products could represent a hole in your network. And later on, we're going to talk about, the connected fish tank that led to a hack of a casino. But there is no one set of best practices. But some broad things that we know are you've got to have secure encryption of data traveling both at rest and in motion from every aspect, the device to your network to the cloud. You've got to have over-the-air software updates. I think you have to have a software bill of materials so when vulnerabilities are discovered, you can figure out if you are vulnerable very quickly.
Non-standard passwords.
Yeah, non-standard passwords. You need to be training your staff on how to think about security. So things like helping them identify phishing attacks, making sure they don't plug in weird stuff on your network. You need to be running network monitoring software. You have to understand what's behaving weirdly on your network. I mean, there are a lot of things, but
The problem isn't a lack of best practices. The problem is a lack of actually using them consistently.
yeah, and it's a pain.
Yeah, but it needs to be done.
It does. So, good on this survey for saying more people care about it.
They didn't talk to my friends, I guarantee it.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of security, though, we've got some funding. A company called Phosphorus Cybersecurity has scored $38 million in Series A funding. They have a product called Phosphorus Enterprise. Basically, it lets people create an inventory of IoT devices on their network. It gives them their IP address, maker, model, firmware, so they can figure out if their devices are secure or if those devices are vulnerable. I'm actually curious how this handles like software bill of materials kind of requirements, because I think that's a little bit more important than saying, oh, hey, you have, this particular connected fuel pump on your system. You actually want to know that you have the fuel pump that's running this particular type of firmware, and that firmware has this particular, Linux code bit in it that is vulnerable. But
right. I would think this competes against the IoT platforms from, the big 3 or 4 companies, the cloud providers. But I've actually I don't work in an enterprise anymore, so I don't know what those dashboards and metrics look like.
The telemetry data from those types of companies doesn't actually include this.
Yeah.
So it could be a nice add actually on top of that, and maybe we'll get there. But yeah, so this is still helpful. Other funding news, a company called Federated Wireless just raised $58 million in Series D money. And Federated, you may be familiar with because they're the company working with Helium as part of a decentralized 5G network that'll let you put up like 5G hotspots as part of the Federated Wireless network. It's a cellular-based LTE and 5G system. And their goal is basically to incentivize people to operate their own hotspots. And they'll also put up hotspots as well to help drive like a whole new network. I'm really eager to see how this works because I think 5G, and they're using it over the CBRS spectrum. So that is shared spectrum. So I'm really interested to see how this will roll out. It feels like a harder sell than maybe Helium's LoRaWAN network or a traditional 5G network. But, IoT needs cheap connectivity and it needs cheap ubiquitous connectivity. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's talk about Madam A. Omdia, which is a research company, they did a Q4 2021 smart speaker report that saw a couple noteworthy things. One, the market share of Amazon Echo devices has gone down.
A lot.
A lot. And Google and Apple both made gains, but Google's like the second biggest player. So what happened is in 2021, 44% of the market had Amazon smart speakers, 40.8% of the market had Google smart speakers, and 15.1% had Apple smart speakers. Now, Apple doubled its market share, a little more than doubled its market share.
Mm-hmm.
Google almost doubled its market share. It was at 28.2%. And Amazon lost a lot, like almost half.
Yeah, they lost 51% of their market share in terms of shipments in the fourth quarter from 2021 to 2020.
Yeah, it is a lot.
I'm surprised. I mean, these things are on sale all the time. They're practically given away with certain other products. But, here in the US, which is where the data is all around, I mean, I think everybody who really wants one has one or many in their home already. To me, it's like market saturation.
Yeah, and I think people are kind of flipping back and forth between platforms. What we've seen, Amazon used to be the only real option in this game, right? And then Google and Apple came along, and they've been around enough and they've gotten enough devices working on their platforms. Like we've seen a huge rise in HomeKit certified products, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there's saturation in this market. I do think we'll see a lot more shuffle between market players going forward.
I disagree.
Oh, tell me more.
Matter.
Ah, you think Matter's good? See? Okay. It could.
It could.
The idea behind Matter is that you could actually use any smart speaker and control a variety of devices. And if that's the case, I think what then happens is the user interface in the number of services each platform provides matters, and maybe even their privacy practices. I don't know.
Yeah.
So then, but I still think we'll see people like go, oh, now I can use Siri on things and talk to Apple.
I mean, you'll still have people that upgrade the speakers to maybe better quality speakers from what they have. So I'm not saying sales will just disappear, but I don't think there'll be as much of the shift around the ecosystems because there'll be less of a need for it, assuming Matter delivers on what it plans to.
Yeah. The jury's still out until the middle of this year on that.
Exactly.
So we'll see.
You know who was not in the charts, but is in a survey question, and it's the leader? I was going to say Facebook, but I need to say Meta. Omdia also asked people which of the following smart speakers you currently own or use regularly. And Facebook Portal was actually the highest grower at a 12.8% annual change in use. So Facebook Portal usage is up, even though their shipments are not shown in the data that we have. And the Apple HomePod was right behind with a 12.7% rise in usage. Echo was negative, minus 2.5, less usage.
Yeah, I think that's because Portal has like gone from nothing to something. Same with Apple HomePod, because the HomeKit stuff hasn't been kind of as available. And the HomePod and the cheaper HomePods had just come out like when this was happening. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of growth there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just not going to talk about the Facebook Portal.
I don't need any more smart speakers, I can tell you that.
Well, I don't need any more Facebook collecting weird data in my house. And I don't need any more smart speakers, I'll be honest. Okay, let's move on to subscriptions. Because every IoT product seems to need a subscription, so I really enjoyed this interview with the new CEO of Peloton. This is Barry McCarthy, who replaced John Foley as the CEO of Peloton, given all of its struggles. And I think the interesting things in here is he talked a lot about shaking up the subscription market, shaking up the subscription model. And the reporter in the Q&A was asking, hey, is this going to be a hardware company, a software company? And the CEO, he was like, look, the magic is not the hardware. The magic happens on the screen with the user experience. So it's instructors, music, all the social stuff. They just announced a gamification of your workout where you can race people. And that's where they're really going to spend their money. And he also mentioned that today it's a closed platform, but it could one day be an open platform and part of the creator economy. So what else? Could you put an app store on it? What other apps would you do? And I thought that was really smart and interesting. And we see this a lot, which is this like, I'm going to launch hardware, create this world, create this experience, and then open it up if we can find a way to do so. And
I definitely see a benefit to that because I have a non-connected treadmill. And what do? I take my iPad and I watch Netflix while I walk, for example.
Yeah. And I think hardware could become part of just a subscription revenue just to make it. Hardware is a means to get people maybe onboarded a little more easily or make it more convenient to access the subscription in more places. Spotify releasing their hardware. It's a $90 device.
Car thing.
So they released that this week. And I think this is part of that, this idea that you don't need car thing, but if you want to you've got an older car, this makes it really easy to access Spotify wherever you are. And you don't have to worry about Bluetooth and streaming from your phone. And it just makes your subscription that much more valuable. Yeah. So I think this is a good way of thinking about it. I think it's probably a smarter thing to do is to think about offering a subscription service and building hardware that supports it rather than building hardware and then trying to tack a subscription on after the fact.
Yeah, I agree. And there's no question that the company is rethinking, I would say, probably its entire business model with this hire of Barry McCarthy because he was one of the first employees at Netflix, where he eventually became the CFO of Netflix and later Spotify. He helped develop the subscription service model for Netflix. So he's all about subscription. So if they certainly have the right person there. Will they succeed? What changes will happen? Maybe you buy the Peloton instead of paying up front for the hardware, you just pay a monthly fee, eventually own the hardware and get the services for, as part of that deal as well. I don't know, but something has to change.
We see that like with the Whoop band. And I also think if you wrap a subscription service and you build hardware for the subscription service, you don't confuse consumers as much when they go to buy the hardware, right? Because they are not thinking they're actually buying the hardware and then just having to pay the subscription on top of it. They're thinking they're buying this whole service that, includes the hardware. And it's a small shift, but I think it's a really important one.
Interestingly, even though there's talk of maybe them being more open in the future, this week they actually got more closed because this is something we just talked about a few weeks ago about Apple Watch and other health tracking devices integrating with Pelotons and such. Well, Peloton just got rid of the Apple Watch integration with their new, what they call video game mode lane break. And this follows last year of them removing the Apple Gym Kit integration.
Yikes. All right. Moving right along, we have a new Thread product from Eve. The Eve Water Guard, which is a water leak detector, they've got a new one. They added Thread, and they've got a longer cable, a sensing cable, which is good because, you want your sensor to cover as much ground as possible. And the new Eve Water Guard is going to be available for $99.95. And that's really all that is there.
Yeah, if you have the old one, I don't believe you're getting a software update for Thread support.
You will not get Thread support.
Nope.
And then in the connected fitness world, we have a connected rower from a company called Averon, and they just got $18.5 million in Series A funding. They're like a Peloton for rowers. They have a rower with a big screen on it and classes and racing and blah, blah, blah. So maybe they should read that interview with Barry McCarthy before they get too hyped up into their rower as a physical product and think, oh, maybe it should just be part of a big subscription. Okay. And then back to Eve.
I'll keep this brief because I wrote my review of the Eve motion blinds in great detail on the site, so you can read all of my thoughts there. But these are my first smart blinds. It's just a demo set that Eve sent to me, like 2 feet wide and just 3 feet long for the shade. But of course, the cassette itself has a battery inside and radios, so they support Thread. I set it up using Apple's HomeKit apps. I didn't even use the Eve app except for configuring the lowest height I wanted the blinds to go to and a favorite position, because you can just pull on the cord and they'll just go to your favorite position by default that way. I really like these. I will say having Thread in these didn't change the experience. And I'm saying that even though I've never used smart blinds before, because there was a several second delay in tapping the button or using Siri to close the blinds or open the blinds. And I suspect that's common with current blinds. And I think it's because these are battery powered. You can recharge them with a USB-C cord and maybe a portable battery or a plug. But these support Thread's sleep mode for up to 5,000 milliseconds. So that way they're kind of saving energy. So
they take a little longer to wake up.
Yeah, I could see why Thread didn't really help there, And honestly, you don't need blinds to be as immediate with a response as you might say with lights, for example. So I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying it works with Thread. I didn't feel a game-changing anything like I have with other Thread devices. So people in the US can buy these at Select Blinds. You order them online. I found them relatively inexpensive. I priced out 3 60 by 60 inch blinds and it worked out to $1,050. And if I had done that with Lutron Serenas, for example, it would have been $1,800 or more. So, I think they're bringing this in a good product that works well, works with Thread and HomeKit, also Bluetooth, not with Google, not with Amazon yet. And they've done it at a good price.
Yeah. And, IKEA Future, another popular, cheaper smart blinds option, but those are kind of limited in size.
I've noticed that because I looked at those way back when. And we never thought about getting smart blinds, but my wife is interested after using these. And I even had some automations, like my HomeKit compatible doorbell has a lux sensor. I use that
nice.
sensor to create a trigger that when the brightness level hits a certain amount, drop the blinds, for example, and vice versa. When it gets dark at night, raise the blinds or whatever. So it all works seamlessly. It was really, really nice.
Fun. All right. Well, that concludes the news segment of the show. And now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast, Hotline, which this week is sponsored by the LoRa Alliance. The LoRaWAN World Expo is this year's can't-miss IoT event. It takes place July 6th and 7th in Paris. The expo is the only official LoRaWAN event and will bring together the entire ecosystem to showcase why LoRaWAN is the only LPWAN that's scaling massively. You can visit LoRa-alliance.org to learn more about the expo and how to register today. As a note, I will be there, so if you're coming, say hi. Okay. This week on the IoT Podcast Hotline, we are doing something a little different because we really screwed up last time. I'll just be frank with everyone. We had a question about heaters for an outdoor pergola, and we recommended a particular device to make it smarter. But unbeknownst to us, that was the wrong device to recommend. So we are coming back with the right device and a warning not to do what we said last week. Please don't do it. We are not electricians here, and we tried to figure this out. We figured it out incorrectly. So here's what you should do. The Shelly is still a good product to use, but you're going to need to use a Shelly contactor. And these are more expensive products, but not that much more. They're like $75 each. And then you're also going to use that with a relay. You can use a contactor to control the 240 volt circuit and then integrate that into the smart home. None of this will include the dimming capability that our caller last week wanted.
He wanted to control the heat by using a dimmer type switch, which sounds good in theory, but heaters with fans, they have variable loads and require quite a bit of energy to get started. A dimmer switch would not be appropriate for that.
Yeah. So you could use the contactor and a relay.
So we didn't really say the wrong device. We just didn't give the whole package.
Right. But it's important that we give the whole package. Because when you're working with electricity, we don't want to blow anything up. And the other thing to know about Shelly products is they were designed for Europe. So they're redesigning a lot of their stuff for the US market because they entered that. Was it last year or the year before? I cannot remember. The pandemic has just messed me up utterly. So basically,
you can't use the Shellys by themselves. You're going to have to add the contact.
Yes. So there you go. And going forward, we'll be a little bit more cautious. So there you go. And if you have a question for us, we'll start farming out all of our complicated wiring questions to certified electricians, it looks like. But in the meantime, if you have a question, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And also, you'll be entered to win a prize. And this month's prize is a Firewalla device. So you can track your internet traffic all over the place. So it'll be fun. That concludes this segment of the show. But please stay tuned for a message from our sponsor and our guest, Joe Britt, who is the CEO of Affero. We're going to be talking about IoT security and how it's changed over the years. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Somfy, which is a maker of motors and controls for blinds and shades. And I have David Parrott here from Somfy to talk to us. So David, why should our listeners know about Somfy?
Because we're more than just another motor manufacturer. For the past 50 years, we've demonstrated that we care about people and the planet. Somfy creates products intended to improve people's lives, to make them more comfortable and enhance convenience. Our products help to create more efficient buildings while contributing to the well-being of the people who live and work in those buildings.
Okay, so how does Somfy products make people's lives more convenient?
Stacey, life these days is all about convenience. Doing more with less, making life easier, and getting things done faster. That's why Somfy is constantly evolving to make our products not only quieter and more efficient, but also increasingly connected. The smart home needs to feature smart shading, so we are always building on our list of integration. It doesn't matter whether you're using Amazon Alexa or Google Home, or more sophisticated smart home systems like Crestron and Control 4. Your Somfy motorized blinds and shades work with all of them. That means using just one system and one way to control all your smart home products, unless, of course, you prefer to use multiple control systems. That's the best part. It truly is up to the homeowner to create the smart home that works best for their lifestyle.
Nice. So what else sets Somfy apart?
There's two things I wanted to bring up. The first is that Somfy brings indoor and outdoor motorization together. Besides blinds, shades, and drapes, we also motorize rolling shutters, exterior screens, pergolas, and awnings. In fact, we provide the most comprehensive range of motors and controls to motorize interior and exterior solar control products. And that's one big reason why so many of the OEMs choose Somfy. Secondarily, we also have a vast dealer network across the United States and Canada. Our dealers can offer customers a multitude of options to fit their lifestyle and decor needs, including variety in application, colors, styles, fabric, quietness, power options, and more.
That's true. I actually have Somfy blinds. So what's the next step for a listener interested in Somfy motorized products?
A good next step is to visit our website at www.somfysystems.com/IoT to learn more and connect with a dealer in your area.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Joe Britt, who is the CEO of Affero. Hello, Joe. How are you today?
Hello, Stacey. I'm doing great. How are you?
I am really happy to have you on the show as a guest. For a couple of years, we've had you on the show as a sponsor. You always had such good things to say because way early on, y'all were actually building IoT apps for people and connecting devices and in the trenches. And so I would love for you to start out all the way back in 2014 when y'all started Affero. What have you learned?
Right. Well, 2014, it both seems like a long time ago and not a long time ago. When we started the company, I remember a couple of really sort of key analyst reports that I had read that were talking about sort of the next 10 years of growth for the internet. And in these reports, there were predictions that the number of devices that will be connected to the internet would increase tenfold. And so go from around 20 billion to around 200 billion by the year 2025. And this was really interesting, right? Because anytime there's an order of magnitude increase in something, it's probably worth paying attention to what's happening. And so, the genesis of Affero was really driven by a bunch of experiences that the core team had at previous companies, building products like connected set-top box platforms and consumer mobile phone platforms, and thinking about what this really meant. The next tenfold growth in stuff that people want to connect to the internet and interact with. And as we dug into it, we'd been following things like smart home and home automation for a long time, and we understood the product categories, right? Things like lights and switches and fans and irrigation systems. And it was really interesting to think about what challenges faced connecting those kinds of products to the internet. And they really fell into one big bucket at the time that everybody was thinking about, which was just how do you take something that is not a general purpose computing device and connect it to a network that was designed for general purpose computing devices, right? So, if we look at the way that computers and at the time smartphones as well were connecting, they were all full-blown computers with full-blown networking stacks, and they were running very sophisticated software. And this seemed fundamentally at odds with things like light switches and light bulbs and fans, which are not what we would call IT devices, but rather OT devices, with the O being operational, right? They're very single-purpose, fixed-function things. And because of that, they have certain price ranges that they have to fall into to be competitive. And a natural driver for those price points is the hardware that goes inside. So if you do have a microprocessor, like how much power does it have? How much memory does it have? And so the big initial challenge that we saw was just squeezing down the network connectivity components, basic pieces of software that are needed to actually connect to a Wi-Fi network, say. That was a huge challenge, and one that I think a lot of folks recognized early on and attacked. But we tried to step back and get a little more perspective about what life would be like in 2025. And I wish I could tell you that we had predicted COVID back then, but there was just no way to know what kind of upheaval the world was going to go through. But as we look, as we get closer to 2025 and we think about what that world is going to be like for connected devices, the thing that I think we were quite prescient about in 2014 was a recognition of the growing threat of security for all of these connected devices. I remember pretty clearly in 2014 talking to a lot of folks about this, and a very common reaction was like, we're talking about a light bulb. They could say, I could kind of understand it for maybe a door lock, but if you're talking about something like a switch or a fan, why do I really care if this thing is secure? And I think that's a really interesting reaction. But our feeling was, well, there's kind of a lot of stuff that maybe people don't think about that often that really represent the core threats. There was a very famous story about a connected fish tank in Las Vegas that was compromised. The thing that's interesting about that is the attacker was able to get into the rest of the network for the hotel where that fish tank was by going through that non-secure connected fish tank controller.
Yes, that fish tank is almost as famous as Target's HVAC system, which allowed them to get into the point of sale service. So you're right. Okay, one of the big challenges in device security right now, in the wake of solar winds, and I know that's computing, but it's something we should be aware of, are supply chain attacks. And we're seeing a little bit on the chip side and a little bit on the software side, companies trying to address this. This is something y'all have actually been thinking about for quite some time. And what kind of solutions make sense for solving that problem?
Right. I mean, that's an extremely important point and question. And I think one of the things that's a little different about the way that Affero approached the security for these kinds of devices problem is through thinking not just about the actual crypto and techniques that are used to secure a communication channel between a device and the cloud, like VPN, but thinking about the creation of that device as well. Like, how do we create this kind of hermetically sealed system that goes from manufacturer of the product all the way through the end user using the product and getting it on their network? Because you may have heard of this before. I mean, a common attack vector is through the factories that build products. If you can compromise the line and inject some kind of unknown or malicious code in the factory, then the product goes out into the wild pre-compromised. And so the way Affero works, we actually provide the tools that do the secure provisioning of the product in the factory as well to create that true hermetically sealed solution.
So let's move to 2022, comparing it to 2014, 2015. Are your customers looking to you for better security? Like you mentioned that in the early days, they were like, who needs it on a light bulb? Are your customers aware of the scope of the problem and their role in fixing it?
Without question. I think there have been enough of these kinds of compromises that have been reported on that there's a tremendous amount of awareness around this kind of fundamental issue with these kinds of connected devices. And if you're a brand and you're building a product that you're going to sell under your brand, there's a recognition that a compromise of your products in the wild will have a negative reflection on everything that you represent through that brand. So without question, I mean, I think kind of looking back at how we got here, our feeling that this kind of this importance around security was extremely well founded.
Okay, so y'all have done a lot. And I know that we have talked in the past about your work with Kenmore and their connected appliances. And last year, y'all came out really hard with Home Depot's app. And I am really excited just to talk about what the priorities were, because Home Depot itself has made a big journey in the connected home in IoT. They started out thinking, hey, our stores are going to be a hub. We're going to have dedicated spaces in our stores to market these products, and it's going to be a real boon for our business. And they didn't do a hub like some of the other companies did in this space, but they were clearly interested in it for a long time. And I would love to understand their journey and how they ended up basically creating not a hub, but their own app and products that work with this app for people.
Well, I think from my point of view, when I think about this and I think about the opportunity, we're talking about smart home, and in smart home, it's all about such an incredible variety of products that make up a smart home. I mean, there's obviously things like smart speakers and smart televisions, and people have tablets in their home that they carry around. But really, the focus for really making the house responsive is about controlling things like lighting and heating and your backyard and irrigation, right? So there's an incredibly broad range of products that are all sold through Home Depot. And so I think it's very natural to think about them having a platform like HubSpace that unifies and provides this great consistent control across that entire range of products. And then also ties into things like Alexa and Google Home, right? So it's very, very complementary in that regard. I think Home Depot is also extremely aware of the things their customers really care about. And this is things like, even if they don't know about security, they care about security. They care about their home being safe and secure. And they also care about products just working.
Security for these devices almost seems like an intractable problem for the manufacturers and also for consumers to understand. Because as a consumer, I feel like it's a lot to ask me to understand the risk profile of a light bulb versus my oven. So, how do you help your customers who are building these products kind of find the right level of security?
When we started building Affero, remember again, this is at the time when folks were saying, why do I really need strong security in these kinds of products? We thought, well, maybe we should have a version of Affero that doesn't have security, or maybe we should have a version of Affero that has different levels of security. But the thing that we realized was that there's so few people on the planet who actually understand what the nuances of that decision-making process are, that we felt like we should just go with the best security we can come up with a hardware component to back it up, and the secure provisioning mechanisms that I was talking about before, the tools that we put in the factory that do this, and just manage everything. You know, it's like a managed VPN almost. Like if you work for a company and you have an IT department that's managing the secure connections for the laptops of the employees, it's kind of analogous to that. And the other great thing is that, you know, by this point, it's not just us saying, hey, this is secure. We have been independently verified and tested multiple times by a number of different organizations. I mean, that was actually one of the big things that we had to go through when we launched with Home Depot.
So there are a bunch of options out there for this. And I speak as a journalist who covers this space. I have to keep up with like IOXT, there's UL cybersecurity, there is going to be security standards associated with Matter. There are the potential for nutrition labels for, you know, data gathering on devices. So there is a lot. And there are even more depending on different subspecialties. I would say as a media person, or really as a consumer, what should I look for? Like, how do I know that I can trust something? Because it still feels like a Wild West out there.
Well, I mean, I will say from my perspective, it's very heartening to see the activities that you just described happening and coming together, because I think it recognizes an industry-wide understanding that this is important stuff. There are many different folks providing this. You mentioned IOXT. There are a number of Affero and Hubspace things on the IOXT certified product list. And I think if you look at it, we've actually got that third-party certification. There's, you know, they have a couple of different levels. They have self-certification and third-party certification. And from our point of view, you always want to get the third-party certification, right? I mean, it's the same reason you have QA engineers that are separate from development engineers. You want to have that wall in between. I am sure that there will be additional standards and bodies that will emerge to provide more of this kind of security oversight. But it's really, really exciting. It is an exciting time. And it's really exciting that we've been able to get through this gauntlet of security testing and come out with validation.
Okay, good. And broadly speaking, we still have a bunch of devices that were built in before even 2014, before we even cared about IoT. There were the network DVRs, that sort of thing. And then there are a bunch of devices from the 2014, 2015 era that are insecure. And every day I read about, you know, hacks on these systems, devices that are getting hacked using Telnet. Why Telnet? So I would ask you, what advice do you have for businesses, for consumers, for anybody who's sitting here looking at these old devices? Are they salvageable?
Boy, this is an interesting question too. The general answer to are they salvageable is probably not. I mean, these are products that were never designed with the principles in mind that we've been talking about around security. And that's not pejorative. I mean, it's an artifact of the time that they were created. Now, unfortunately, for things like these operational technology devices, they don't tend to sort of get retired as quickly as computers and smartphones. So you're right. We're in this interesting time period where there's a bunch of stuff out there that has a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of them that are actually known, but people still use them. In some cases, because they have no idea. Devices have been sitting around and running for a long time. But I think that with more and more awareness around the threats that those kinds of legacy devices pose, and with the emergence of a wide variety of new products that don't have those shortcomings, they will naturally rotate out. I mean, it's just like with anything, no product lasts forever. But it's a really difficult challenge, for everybody. People install stuff, and then as long as it's still working, they don't want to get rid of it. But leaving things like that in do create a real attack surface.
Excellent. Yes. Tell people to get rid of their old, not secure devices. I'm just like, please, y'all, do it. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. No, I mean, people don't want to. If it's working, they want to keep it. But boy, it's like you're leaving your front door unlocked.
Yeah. So let's move over to another kind of user-friendly question about both design and security, because having to consider this, security in my mind always adds inconvenience. Anytime you've got multi-factor authentication or, something happens on that end, how can companies make that easier, or can they?
Right. Well, with inconvenience, I think inconvenience is actually something that you can kind of shift around. We got to think there's multiple players when we talk about one of these smart home products. There's the end user, of course, and that's the one that you were talking about with the inconvenience. But there's also the brand, and there's the manufacturer, and then there's the platform provider. There's whoever's actually writing the software that's enabling that device to connect to the internet, right? And so for the Hubspace products from Home Depot, that's Affero. And so maybe one way to think about it is we migrate the inconvenience from the end user down to Affero. And so Affero handles managing the keys and the key rotation and the secure connections between the devices in the cloud and the secure manufacturing of the cloud. And in that way, maybe we're providing like inconvenience as a service, right? It's like we're actually taking on that work for the ultimate benefit of the manufacturer, the brand, and the end user.
All right. Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show this week, for talking to us about security. It was super fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. This was great. Thank you, Stacy.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.